Everybody, if you have your attention, please, we'll get the evening started. I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Simon Jackson. I'm the chair of the Queensland Tailings Group. So on behalf of the Queensland Tailings Group, I welcome everybody. So thank you very much for the fantastic attendance. I'm not going to speak long. I'm going to introduce Marnie Pascoe from Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto is one of the major sponsors for Angelica's trip. So Marnie's going to start the proceedings this evening. Marnie's the Chief Advisor from Rio Tinto's Major Hazards Group and has joined us this evening in town for the week, so great that she was able to join us. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Marnie.
And welcome to the Queensland Tailings Group's Social Cost of Tailings Management. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay our respects to their elders past and present. Tonight's talk is about the mining industry understanding the social consequences of mining in general and tailings management in particular. And to introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to welcome Professor Deanna Kemp, who is the Director of the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining in the Sustainable Minerals Institute. So please welcome Deanna.
Good evening everybody, and thank you Marnie, and also to the QTG for making this event possible. As Marnie said, my name is Deanna Kemp and I'm the Director of the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining, which is part of the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and waters here in Meanjin or Brisbane, and to pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants and to honour their continuing connection to country. So my role tonight is to introduce our guest speaker, Angélica Amanda Andrade, who's travelled from Brumadinho in Brazil all the way to Brisbane to speak to us tonight. Before welcoming Angélica to the stage, I would like to ask everyone just to pause. Everyone in this room has likely had a very busy day with many pressing matters to attend to. But nonetheless, for this talk, we ask you to really ensure that you're present and very prepared to listen to Angelica's story. Angelica's story is very powerful, very personal, and deeply disturbing. The horror that she and her family experienced on the 25th of January 2019 and the trauma they've faced every day since then is a burden that should not be borne by anyone. Angelica's story is one of loss and devastation. It's also a story of great courage and determination. She's now fighting for reparations and accountability for the harms caused by the irresponsible management of mine waste in her community. How you listen and react to what Angelica will share with you today is really important. We will have time for reflections and questions after Angelica has spoken, and we really encourage you to ask questions that enhance your understanding of her lived experience. Angelica's aim is to give others a glimpse into this horrendous event and its aftermath through her eyes. It's her hope that you use this insight as motivation to drive change, whatever role you play with the mining industry. I first heard Angelica speak on the 24th of January 2020, on the eve of the first anniversary of the disaster. She was speaking at a major investor event in London. She spoke about the harms that had been perpetrated in Brumadinho and explained her fight for justice. At that time, I was immersed in the difficult process of the Global Tailings Review. I was one of 7 people on the expert panel tasked with drafting a new global standard, now known as the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, or the GISTM. Some of us on the expert panel were in a bit of a fight of our own, working very hard to position communities and social performance as integral to tailings management and facing a lot of pushback from industry. There were many presentations at that London event, but Angelica's was the most potent. Hers was a very clear and a very dignified call for mining companies to take responsibility for the risks that they generate and to be held accountable for the harms they cause. So for the expert panel, her voice reminded us how important it was to ensure that social performance and community rights were a very prominent feature in the GISTM. And we succeeded to an extent, but there is so much more work to do. So by listening to Angelica tonight, hopefully you and we will all get a renewed sense of how important it is to close those gaps. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to get to know you this week, Angelica, and to listen to you once again, and to be reminded of the struggle involved when mining companies fail to take into account the consequences that their activities can have on local people. And with that, Angelica, I welcome you to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor and a big responsibility to be here tonight. And I want to thank the Queensland University, especially Professors Deanna, Kemp and David Williams, who have been so amazing to me ever since I got to Australia. And also Rio Tinto, with special thanks to Theo and Fernanda. And the Queensland Tailings Group for giving me this opportunity. And also I want to thank everyone who took the time to come and listen to me. This is my first time in Australia, and so I'm still learning about Australia's First Nations peoples. I have not done it before today, but I would like to follow protocol and acknowledge the traditional owners of this area. I would like to pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants, including connection to country. And continuing connection to country. I think it's important to acknowledge people's histories, stories, and where they come from. And today I'm going to share a little bit of my own story in my talk. Our topic is the social cost of tailings management, and it is impossible to talk about it without acknowledging the highest price paid when tailings aren't managed properly, which is the loss of life. As we look at the pictures of the victims from Brumadinho, I want us to reflect that if we are here today, it is because deadly criminal tragedies, which could have been prevented, have occurred. No life should ever be lost for economical gain, and we as a society cannot allow for it to continue to happen. I invite everybody to please stand up as we have a moment of silence in honor of all of the victims. Thank you. I will now pray, and if you are a Christian, I invite you to pray with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. This is Brumadinho. It is a small town located in the state of Minas Gerais. It is located in a valley surrounded by mountains. There is a river that goes right through the center of the town. And it has a lot of rural areas around it as well. And in small communities like mine, families are very close. And the family bond is the most important thing we have. So when we lose a family member, it is like losing a part of you, and it's devastating, especially if it's a preventable death. Brumadinho and Mariana are now small towns that will be forever marked with pain, loss, and so many tears. from so many mothers like my own, from so many fathers like my own, from so many sisters and brothers like me, from so many children who are now orphans, from so many spouses like my brother-in-law who became widows and widowers. These towns are now associated with the world's worst tailing dams failures, one in terms of lives lost and the other one in terms of environmental destruction. My sister was a victim of a corrupt system that, by acting out of pure greed and disregard for others and the environment, has caused unparalleled damage and can no longer continue as it has been. Companies' main duty from now on must be to guarantee the safety of their operation and then to think about how it can be profitable, not the other way around. Activists like me don't get many opportunities to be heard and historically have been ignored when trying to denounce problems, or worse, as in what happened last month in northern Brazil, when Brazilian indigenous Bruno Pereira and British journalist Tom Phillips were murdered. There are protesters in Brumadinho whom Vale has sued. Even with that risk, I won't stop because I know the importance of my actions for all who don't have the same courage or opportunity. Before the Brumadinho failure, there were activists who denounced the problems in mining and tried to prevent Vale from getting an environmental license in 2018. Post-Brumadinho, more local groups were formed, like Avabrum, which I'm a member of. It would certainly be easier for me not to speak about these events and just move on with my life, because every time I speak, it causes an emotional and psychological impact on me. But if my efforts can prevent even one death, it's all worth it. Having gone through the deeply traumatic and painful loss of my sister, I will do everything in my power so that no one else has to go through that. This is my family. That's my sister Karini, me, my dad, my mom, and Natalia. Natalia was the oldest, I'm the youngest, and so, of course, Karini is the middle one. And I didn't come here today to speak to you out of hatred because Natalia was brutally killed. I did feel so much anger, outrage, pain, and disgust, and I was filled with darkness when I learned the circumstances that led to her death, which were indeed so appalling. I was immersed in depression, life had lost its joy, and I thought I'd never be happy again until the day when I'd see my sister again after this life. I went from being healthy to being on so many pills, both to help with the psychological trauma and the physical problems that arose from low immunity. It's deeply saddening to think that there are so many people still in that state in my hometown. And there are several who have actually died from the sadness, and others who have committed suicide because they couldn't bear it. As for myself, in order to get out of this pit, I made the hardest decision of my life, to forgive the people responsible for her death. By forgiving, I was able to have the strength to continue speaking for those who can't. And it's because of that decision of letting go of the resentment that I'm here today. But don't get me wrong, life has not been rainbows and butterflies, and it didn't go back to what it was before the dam failure. I still need medical and psychological support, and there are moments that I have to fight to not let anger overcome me again. All the plans, all the hopes, all the dreams we had anteriorly were crushed. We somehow had to put ourselves back together and find the strength to go on with a missing part of us. A week before I came here, my mom was so sick and so depressed that she was crying when she was in bed, and she told me she couldn't take the pain anymore, that she missed my sister so much that she wanted to be with her. And she asked me to pray that God would take her. We have to deal with the consequences of the tragedy daily, and with the ups and downs for the rest of our lives. Our lives were turned upside down, and I'm sure they'll never be the same again. I didn't know what real pain was until that day. I could never grasp how hurtful it would be to see my parents weep, and it still is hurtful to this day. As I've said on another occasion, my parents, and in fact no loving parent, deserves to have to bear their child. And it is to avoid that anyone else goes through that I'm here today. We need more humanity in the mining sector. You have no idea how hard it is to recover from an event as traumatic as what we experienced in Brumadinho. No matter how I try to explain with words, only when you go through it, or better survive it, you can understand the dimension of a catastrophic event such as a dam failure. It is so unsettling that the consecutive failures weren't yet enough to drive radical change in the mining sector, and to see Vale's constant effort to go on as if nothing had happened, and as if hundreds of people hadn't been killed with cruelty in an awful manner because of them. I was thrilled when I learned that a new global standard would be launched with the goal of zero harm, but I was disappointed to see that it was launched yet failing to deliver it. Even more disappointed in seeing how pragmatic and insensitive ultimately ICMM is, not different than past events or when Vale's former president didn't stand up in a moment of silence to honor the victims shortly after the burst. After Mariana, Vale produced a report estimating the loss of life if B1 burst, since it was knowingly a risky dam, and they estimated how much it would cost them to do reparations. And from that, they chose to continue the operations instead of stopping it because financially it made more sense to them. Like most families from a small town, mine is a very close one. This picture is the last picture that we took with my family complete on New Year's, 25 days before Natalia took her last breath. Pictures mean a lot for a family like mine, especially because my dad's a photographer, so was my grandfather, who was the first one in Brumadinho. And the next time that my family gathered for a picture, a few months after that, we even managed to put a smile for it, because it's customary in Brazil, as the Brazilians in the room will know. We always smile for pictures. But right after that, we just all burst into tears because it hurt so much not to have Natalia there with us anymore. Just a few days ago, on the 24th, I was already here in Australia. It was my dad's birthday, and we always used to celebrate it at Natalia's place, and it was a day always associated with laughter and family time and good memories. But ever since he lost her, he doesn't even like to mention his birthday. Ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to come to Australia, but I could never imagine what circumstances would bring me here. I remember as a child, when I was around 9 or 10 years old, it was like our Saturday traditions in the morning, me, my mom and my sisters, to clean the house while we would have a DVD from Hillsong Church playing, and Hillsong Church is from here, and that's how I've always wanted to come to Australia. And I didn't speak English back then, but I would sing loudly and all wrong, and my sisters would say, "Shut up!" And my mom would say, "Let her sing, she's worshiping God." And then after that we would have lunch, we would make brigadeiro, which is a Brazilian sweet, and we would do our nails together. And I have so many good memories with Natalia. And I'm so glad that I do. This is my favorite picture of the three of us. It was in New Year's 2015 in her place. We had an amazing time. We took lots of pictures with the family. And although I'm so grateful that I have that many great memories with her, it's so sad to think about the many children and the many babies who will not have a chance to build memories or have pictures with their loved ones. The families of these 4 victims have not been able to bury their loved ones, and I can't imagine how hard it must be for them. In Mariana, one of the 19 victims hasn't been recovered. The Fundão Dam collapsed in November 2015, and it was from San Marco, which is a joint venture owned by BHP and Vale. Recently, a decision was published that accepted the jurisdiction of the English courts to hear a claim for compensation against BHP Group brought by more than 200,000 people who were affected by the dam. This is a historic decision that, besides direct effects for the victims who may have their claims judged by the English court, should change the way that foreign companies do business in Brazil and other emerging countries. I quote from The Guardian. The Court of Appeal released a 107-page judgment on Friday that BHP, which had its headquarters in England at the time of the dam's collapse, would have to account for its role in the disaster. This follows an earlier ruling that said English courts would not hear the case. The judgment said compensation being paid in Brazil did not seem adequate. It stated the vast majority of claimants who have recovered damages have only received very modest sums in respect of moral damages for interruption to the water supply. The claimants should be permitted now to proceed with the claims in the action. Vale and BHP have no sensibility as to the psychological damages they've caused and how long-term they are. And in the case of Brumadinho, from the beginning, they have not at all been supportive of the victims or our requests, and they actually never approached the families. I was an exception because I spoke internationally, and that bothered Vale. So I got a call from the director of reparations after I spoke at the PRI convention in Paris. And he showed apparent support, but sometime later, when I sent him an email with suggestions for actions of reparation in Brumadinho, he didn't even bother to reply. And no other family member got a call from him or from anyone in Vale. And the greatest proof of their insensibility is that they've been denying people from Brumadinho and family members the right to indemnities, one that was negotiated with Vale in their deal of billions of dollars with the government, and this is an issue that has been denounced for years now. Of course, no money will ever be able to repair the damage or bring back our loved ones, but it allows possibilities for people to start over and find ways to recover. Vale and the government largely ignore the actual pain and suffering of the victims and fail to repair us with the minimum degree of dignity. I do hope that changes with the new global standard, but sadly, I haven't seen changes so far, and the issue of reparations has to be better addressed in the standard to safeguard victims. It was outraging when in 2020, Brazilian federal prosecutors accused BHP and Vale of collusion to reduce indemnity to victims of Mariana and intervene in the lawsuit happening in the UK against BHP, as it was denounced by Reuters. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a news report in English about it, but I'll later share the slides in my LinkedIn account, and you can access the source and translate it if you'd like. Vale tries to hide it, but it always eventually shows its nature of corruptibility and deceit. People from Mariana have not been able to return home, and the foundation established to be responsible for the reparations, called Renova, has done a recognizable terrible job. In Brumadinho, around the time of the anniversary of the tragedy 7 months ago, Vale installed interactive screens to advertise their reparation in several locations in town. I took this picture in a bakery, and they did that while denying people the rights of reparation, while denying us simple things, like, for example, the change of the uniforms of their employees. It hurts us to see people around town wearing that uniform, in which our loved ones died. Shortly after my post on LinkedIn about the screens, denouncing Vale's hypocrisy, they were removed, and thank God I haven't seen them since. Still, if you turn on the TV or the radio in Brazil, or if you do a simple Google search, you always see some advertisement from Vale. They invest heavily in propaganda and try to create a false image of who they are and what they've been doing. The so-called reparations are nothing more than their mere obligation, since they caused all the damage. So it's ridiculous that they advertise it as if they were doing society a favor. The Brumadinho settlement with the state even jeopardized Vale's investment plans. They're reprocessing the tailings from the burst in Brumadinho, and they draw battle in court with all the individuals like me who sued them. And they do that to try as hard as possible to deny us some sort of dignified compensation for all we've been through. There is a survivor named Leuso, who was badly injured in the burst, and we've not been able to provide for his family because of the long recovery process. He said that if he had died, just like his co-workers, at least his family would have been financially supported. 2 books have been launched by the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry, reporting the causes and consequences of Brumadinho. The one on the left is by the Parliamentary Assembly of the State of Minas Gerais. It's called Option for the Risk. And the one on the right is by the Chamber of Deputies. And I quote from the conclusion of one of them. From the analysis of the evidence collected by this commission, there is no doubt that the Brumadinho crime was caused by the omission of those who, in the exercise of their professional duties, were aware of the unstable condition of the MB1, and although they could, did not take any steps to try to avoid the loss of life and damage to the environment. The evidence points to the fact that Vale employees could and should have acted to avoid the outcome. yet failed to do so. Everyone involved, from technicians to the company's president, was aware of the risk of B1 breaching, evidence of which dates back to 2016, shortly after the Mariana disaster, and did nothing to prevent the dam from breaking. With this conclusion, I continue to urge every investor who has a minimum sense of ethics and humanity to not invest in Vale. And I go further to say that everyone should follow the example of the Church of England and divest from it and from all the companies who act irresponsibly. The lawsuit from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission against Vale is a victory for us. The complaint alleges that Vale manipulated multiple dam safe audits, obtained numerous fraudulent stability certificates, and regularly misled local governments, communities, and investors about the safety of the Brumadinho Dam through its environmental, social, and governance (ESG) disclosures. Vale's public sustainability reports and other public filings fraudulently assured investors that the company adhered to the strictest international practices in evaluating dam safety, and that 100% of its dams were certified to be in stable condition, according to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The conclusion from the inquiry also has to be an alert to everyone who works in the engineering and technical sector of a mining company, that they are responsible for lives. And if that is your case, remember that your job goes much beyond calculations, being rational, and working from a comfortable office. You are dealing with the loss of lives and huge environmental impact in case you fail, if you are omissive, or if you give in to pressure to conceal data. The companies Vale and TÜV sued, along with individuals who worked for them, are now in trial for murder and can face jail time. When you are in charge of a dam, ask yourself, could my family and I live safely downstream from it? And are the workers safe? Because they also have families to get back to. Natalia told my mom about a safety training they had 2 weeks before the failure. And we now know that most people who were able to realize what had happened, despite the sirens having not worked, followed what they were instructed to do in an emergency situation, but nonetheless the majority didn't escape because the speed of the tailings didn't give them enough time. A survivor said he was running alongside some co-workers and he followed his instinct of going as high as he could go instead of following the escape route. And he was running, and he said at some point he looked back and all of his co-workers had disappeared and were taken by the wave of tailings. The engineering team has to make sure that the people who live or work downstream from an area of risk have enough time to escape in case of a failure. And if not, make sure they are relocated or at least aware of the risks before it happens. Another life was lost in Brumadinho in 2020. It was near Christmas when the worker Júlio Cordeiro was killed by asphyxiation after part of the slope's embankment collapsed. An inclined plane of land built to ensure the stability of the embankment and contain the mining tailings. Júlio was married and the father of a 4-month-old baby. On the day of his death, it was raining in the region of Córrego do Feijão mine, the same mine of B1. Days before his death, another worker recorded a video showing his fear in the face of the risks of mining activity. He asked his family to keep his statement as proof of the invisible violence they suffer every day in mining in Brumadinho. The video is available in the link. Although the workers were aware of risks and expressed their concerns, the engineers told them they could go out there. And after Júlio's death, on the very next day, instead of receiving support, what they heard from their bosses was, "You need to know that you work in mining in an area with risk of collapse, and each of you needs to be aware that, just like Júlio, you may never go home again." We never thought that Natalia would one day not return home safely to us. We trusted Vale as the internationally recognized company it was, whose ethos was life first. Now we hear about bosses openly telling the workers that their lives are at risk, and the workers have no choice because they have families to feed. Brazil is still a country with a lot of poverty, but this can't go on like this. Mining companies cannot just keep doing what they want, as they want to, with no consequences for them. It is not just here in Australia or in Canada that indigenous people have suffered because of mining. Near Brumadinho, the indigenous group that depended on the river's water, which became totally contaminated with tailings from the dam, saw their life changing drastically. The river was full of life before, but it became dead. As you can see in the picture, there are some fish there. And this is from before the burst. On the day of the failure, my dad was actually fishing there in that river. He used to go every week. But right now it's not safe at all to even be around it. And here you can see the before, below, and after in the picture above. We need internationally binding rules and sanctions for companies that violate human rights and cause environmental pollution by not handling their tailings properly. In my opinion, the UN is not doing enough in face of such a serious issue. Why has ICMM been given more power than it should have, both in the process of drafting the new global standard for tailings management and in the Global Tailings Management Institute Advisory Panel, which I'm a member of, when clearly it is the mining sector which hasn't operated in accordance to previous standards and failed to guarantee the safety of their employees, causing death and destruction. It is a great cause for concern that ICMM protects its fundamental interests above all else. If you haven't read the book, oh, there should be a picture of the book here, I'm sorry about that, by Professor Deanna and Professor Andrew Hopkins, I strongly advise you to. The name of the book is Credibility Crisis. And because of the power that companies have through ICMM, I'm afraid that ultimately investors in the UN will be okay with a compromise and with a clear conscience for having done something when in fact, until some harm instead of zero harm is tolerated, everything that is done is unacceptable. I was pleased that the standard was launched as an initial step and that now the Institute will be formed, but they cannot just be something to please society while not achieving what should be the main goal of complete intolerance to death. The mining industry has to start acting differently because clearly the current model of business has not worked. I'm not an engineer, but for me it's simple enough to understand that if you build an upstream tailings dam designed to hold certain amount of materials, but it's in an area that gets a lot of rain every year, you're going to have extra water, extra weight, and if you don't have mechanisms in place to get that extra water out, surely the failings will liquefy and cause a failure. The fact that Vale did nothing while knowing this and knowing the danger it's them presented and having all the resources to do so says enough about their ethics, or better, lack of it. When a company knows the risks and does nothing, it is choosing to kill, and it has to be held accountable. Not just the company, but the individuals who were involved in the decision-making process. The standard as it is now falls short in important respects, one of which is the matter of conflict of interest, which was one of the main reasons that the death toll was so high in Brumadinho. If the dam hadn't been certified as safe, it is unlikely that so many workers would have been around it, specifically just below the dam when it burst. And the dam was only certified as safe because the German certifier TÜV felt pressured by Vale to do so, as investigations have shown, because they didn't want to lose their contracts. As Claudia Miller-Hoff, the senior legal advisor for the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights puts, certifiers must be obliged to respect human rights in the same way as other companies are. They often do inadequate work that lacks quality standards. We need a way to hold these companies accountable. And in order to clarify TÜV's responsibility, me and 4 other Brazilians who lost close family members in Brumadinho, ECCHR and Misero filed a criminal complaint in October 2019 against a TÜV employee, as well as a law infringement complaint against TÜV with the public prosecutor in Munich. Brazilian organizations Hanser, Caritas Brasileira, and International Articulation of People Affected by Vale support the complaints. This was the B1 dam before it burst, and this one facility, which was not even that big, has caused so much destruction. It is critical that the dams are certified according to their actual level of safety and stability to guarantee that in the event of a rupture, no people will be downstream as it has happened. With so many unsafe dams that weren't managed properly for decades and had fraudulent certifications, we can't ignore the possibility of another catastrophe happening. This is the largest tailings dam in Brazil. It is 60 times the size of B1 dam in Brumadinho. It's located in Paracatu, which is also in the state of Minas Gerais, and currently operated by Canadian company Kinross. In 2020, an investigation was launched by public authorities due to the detection of cracks, the beginning of erosive processes, and probable geotechnical compromises of the structure. The impacts of mining activity in Paracatu have been known for quite some time. Among the reports of human rights violations caused by mining are the expropriation and destruction of Quilombola territories, which are territories where former African slaves and their descendants live, criminalization of artisanal miners, impairment of traditional production activities, impacts of explosion and noise on housing conditions, indiscriminate use of water, destruction of springs, environmental contamination, health risks to the population, tax evasion and tax waivers. Other than that, towns like Brumadinho, Paracatu, Mariana, and so many others have been held hostage by the mining companies. And without building an economic and social alternative over the years, the local politicians and the population find themselves completely handed over to them without having an adequate counterpart and having to deal with a series of daily violations. While the company stays in town, it doesn't recognize its damages or give back to the community, and when it leaves town, there is a social, economical, and environmental gap. Being here and seeing the quality of life, the beautiful public parks, for example, in South Bank, there is even a public beach that was constructed. I wish there were things like that back home, and there should be, considering how much money is generated from our natural resources. As you can see, there is a population. Is the mouse there? Anyways, there is the dam, Paracatu, and there is a community just below it with 600 people. So, as you can imagine, it would be catastrophic if it failed. In comparison, here was the B1 dam, so located in a rural area. About a kilometer from it was the administrative center where my sister worked, and the restaurant where most people were at the time of the failure. There were also a few houses and guest houses down there, but the damage could have been even worse if there were more people down there. So this is a picture of before and after. We all need to continue fighting and advocating for more actions, globally and locally, both to repair the damages that have been done and to prevent more damage in the future. Especially that not even one more family has to bury their loved one because of negligence. With all that said, it is highly important that all of us here today understand that we have an important role in this new era in the mining sector, one that unfortunately was propelled because of so many mistakes made and so much avoidable destruction and loss that took place. The people of Brumadinho wanted to see humanity and empathy from Vale. They wanted to be contacted and to hear from the company, "I'm sorry for your loss," but they never got that. What I hope to see from the companies from now on is more responsibility, a true commitment to safety first, and that the company does right by the affected communities, especially in case of a failure. There has to be more communication between communities and companies. People have the right to know what kind of risk they are exposed to so they can make informed decisions. One life is worth more than the whole world. And my aim as an activist is that the value of life is perceived, recognized, and upheld by the mining sector. We have to intervene, stay alert, and keep pressure for change until it is actually achieved. I'm tired of seeing the mining sector act like they are above everyone and everything just because they have a lot of money and power. I'm tired of seeing how they can pretend to care, but ultimately just do what benefits their endless search for profit. So far, they've gotten out unscathed while their victims were left in pieces. And that is unacceptable. Criminal actions have to be punished, screw-ups have to be fixed, reparations have to be done correctly, and above all, life has to be respected and valued as the most precious thing of all. So far it hasn't been, and I'll keep speaking until it is. Thank you.
perspectives and your journey so far in terms of, the aftermath, and for being here tonight. So Angelica is very happy to take questions, reflections, comments, but she's very keen to have an exchange with you. It's a very big group. There are only 2 microphones, so we'll do our best. If you would like to just reflect, you're very, very welcome. So we have one question down the front, but we've got plenty of time. It is, it is a very disturbing talk, so sometimes it does take a while for people to warm up, and feel free to share. But please do. That's what she's here for tonight, in the time that we've got after the talk. But I'll take Janine's question first. So please.
Do I need to share it? Yeah. I guess I've got a reflection as well as a question. I was deeply moved by that. I lost my sister when I was about your age, and she was 5 years older than me. However, she was sick, so we had time to prepare, and she had 2 very young children. That was 20 years ago, and I can tell you it doesn't get any easier. And it's I know all about the birthdays and what we have right now is her children are having their children, and it's her birthday in 2 days' time. So she died on Anzac Day. So every year it's there. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose someone so suddenly, and so just cruel. I guess it makes me feel just really sad that is your experience of the resources sector, because obviously that was really terrible, but there are so many people in the sector who care deeply about what we do and want to do it to the highest standards, and there's no excuse for I just can't believe that statement about you just have to expect to not come home from work. That makes me think of in America, where you send your children to school and they may not come home alive, that day. So in terms of a question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I'm part of a Global Action on Tailings group, which was formed after Brumadinho, which is the professional bodies, sort of 7 professional bodies around the world. And we have a building trust committee that's kind of part of that, and I'm part of that. And we just grapple with, how do we start to build trust when there's such a trust deficit? There's just been so much destruction, and it really upsets me to hear just how Vale has handled this. Just if there'd been that bit of humanity, it won't erase what's happened, but you could start to process it and deal with it. What can we do? Is there anything that we can do to start to build trust in an environment like this? And ICMM had an opportunity to do something, and instead they let their interests overtake what was the right thing to do. And it's got to be an independent body that does this stuff. So I don't know if that's a question, but just, is there anything we can do?
Well, the fact that Rio Tinto invited me here and has this interest in talking to me, and I got this question that you asked, what can we do, how can we approach communities? And I see that people are really interested here in Australia in doing things right, and that gives me hope for a different future. So I guess we can start from there, talking to people, getting to know their stories, getting to know that you have a family, they have a family. Of course we have different professions, but at the end we are all human. And I think, talking of course specifically about Brazil, which is my case, I think it was lost over there. The communities have been largely ignored, and the companies have acted in such an arrogant way, and these barriers have to be broken, and there has to be better communication. So I think, of course, the sector has to act humbly, first of all, recognize its mistakes, apologize, try to do right for what has been done wrong. And from there you can start building trust again, I guess.
She's very good with questions. Yeah.
Firstly, sorry for your loss. You know, we talk a lot about social engagement and the mining companies standing up and taking responsibility and saying sorry. But how do we make that happen? How do we get that social engagement with the community? You know, often we can, I'm a bit like you. I've worked a lot with fatalities and I always get upset. And it's very easy to say that a company's going to do this, they're going to do right, and they're going to engage with the community. But how do you make that happen?
Well, example, here in Australia you have Sorry Day, right?
Yeah.
We need actions like that. Like in Brumadinho, every 25th of every month there is an act of remembrance.
Yeah.
Vale has never been present. So other companies could show support, like you could go there, you could see the people, you could talk to people, hear from them, visit the site, go to Mariana, do the same. I guess that would, like in the case of Brazil, that would be an initial step. And the companies that have operations in other communities and other places, you could start having a public meeting and inviting people and say, look, we are here, we want to do things right by you, we want to know your concerns, we want to know what we can do for you. And yeah, communicating, listening, and being human, as I said, as in the way you approach people, I guess.
All right,
From there.
thank you.
One up the back and one over. Unless you've got a big booming voice. Yeah, I think you do. I reckon you don't need a mic.
Thank
You
you
have
so
to
much
stand
for-
up and
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. It was really brilliant. I think for us, it's trying to understand how we can get communities not in danger from this type of event. How can we get mining companies, communities to be more engaged in saying, right, well, how can we remove that risk? You know, why are we building these communities so in the pocket of risk? You know, is there, surely that's a proactive measure that can be, seems expensive in the initial, but I mean, we've seen the consequence. Can't we move toward that type of narrative?
Well, that's not easy because let's consider the case again. I'm sorry to keep bringing up Brazil, but that's what I know about. Just in Minas Gerais, there are, I believe, 800 something municipalities. So it's hard to relocate everybody and make changes, and I think it's a historical process that sometimes people are there first and then the mining company comes and build the tailings, but other times it's the other way around. Because of the mining activity, a community is built. And the problem is over decades, the management and no, that's not the word I was looking for. How the tailings dams were dealt with, that was not done properly. So it's very hard to just right now suddenly you fix everything. I understand that it's very hard to make that happen. So the first thing I believe that has to be done right now is to assess the actual stability of the dams, and if the engineers cannot predict it, cannot know, then make sure that people are aware. Look, this dam exists, it's here, it's not safe. Do you want to move? because I was even talking to Fernanda about this earlier today. There are many people in small communities that are very attached to the land, that they might say, no, even if I die, I want to die here, this is where I am from. But people have to know, I guess right now, the best thing to do is to make sure that knowledge is shared, that people know the risks, knows about the dams. Like, I grew up in Brumadinho, and I didn't know we had tailings dams over there up to Mariana. After Mariana, that I learned from Natalia that we had a dam, and I thought it was just one. Now I know there are other ones. So people have to know that. And of course, from now on, yes, like we shouldn't build tailings that are the cheapest ones, which was the process or the common thing to do before. Of course, the companies just were thinking money, 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 how can we save money, how can we make money? I guess right now it's time to stop and think, how can we make it safe as possible? Yeah, I guess that's it.
Any other questions? Hello.
Actually, first of all, thanks for the speech and for what you shared with us. I think it was amazing. And I have to share something as well. Probably we discussed about this before. I tried to organize an event with Hopkins in Brazil, and in fact, there was some companies trying to push back. Actually, I'd like to ask a question to Deanna, because probably a year ago, I was in Mumbai, and I heard the CEO saying the standard was put together because the industry decided to do that. And I'd like to understand from your side what was the push in reality, and all those recommendations which you and Andrew put together, put through the standard, and in fact it was pushed back, such as the independent certification and the way the risk would be managed for the construction of new tailings dams and so forth. How you see that? How you see the behavior of these big companies, powerhouses? How they embracing these, or are they pretty much ignoring?
I'll share that question with Angelica, but I think the companies did take action and did respond, but you started your talk by saying this was on the back of many incidents, that it took something as horrific as Brumadinho for the industry to really take very strong and immediate action. So, I mean, I might hand the ball to Angelica as well to say, it takes so much to speak up and to speak out. I had my own frustrations. I wrote a book about the process because it was, it was very difficult to push for change, and you spoke just then about, the system being a bit stuck at the moment, and the energy and the stress and the trauma that it takes for you to speak up time and time again. But the push that is needed, and it is why Angelica is here tonight, is to push us all to close down those gaps as well. So perhaps you could just talk a little bit more about how difficult it is and why you're motivated to push, and what you see is needed in the next push. Just so you have the microphone. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for your question.
Well, I believe that the industry by itself would never say, let's start a new standard for ourselves. But after Brumadinho, there was a huge push from investors, and the UNEP got involved, and then ICMM said, yeah, let's do it, because of course the title of the book is perfect. It's a credibility crisis. Nobody wanted to be involved with the mining sector because the credibility was shattered. And I think the ICMM only agreed to the standard because of that, because they knew their credibility was shattered after Brumadinho and after Mariana. But even though they agreed to it, they try to keep the social side out of it. and to make it in a way that keeps them comfortable, not in the way that is the safest for everybody at the end. So, as I said, of course, it's a great initial step that we got the standard, but there's still a lot to be done.
Thanks for sharing your story. Really touched by that. I was just wondering, how much support did you get from the local people over there, local stakeholders, NGOs? How much they put weight to your drive, and do you think that they have given you sufficient support to create a good impact in terms of making practical changes?
Well, I got a lot of support from NGOs, religious organizations. There was even, I remember, an organization of psychologists who went to Brumadinho to help the people. And I wasn't there at the time, but they would video chat with me to help me. And yeah, a lot of people showed up. A lot of people just dropped everything and went to Brumadinho to help the community, to help the people. It was amazing to see the local response. But I was disappointed with the government, on how the government acted, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they own 40% of Vale. But yeah, when it comes to people, Brazilian people are incredible and they do support each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've then got a question at the back.
I'm all right, actually. I can probably
Yes,
talk
you've
loud
got
enough.
a great voice, so you just do that.
Thanks for sharing your story, Angelica. Really great. It's a great move for you to come all the way and share your story. Now that the industry has come up with the GISTM standard, it's a great move. How effective has it been, or implementation of that standard, do you think, within Brazil and also probably globally? How effective do you think the standard has been?
In Brazil,
Yeah.
I don't see any major changes. And that's very clear because nothing changed for the victims of Brumadinho and Mariana, for example. What I know is that Vale continues to use their upstream dams just like before, so it hasn't changed. And that's a big cause for concern, and I do hope with the establishment of the institutes to assess this, that finally there is actual change. But what I can say from my knowledge is that in Brazil things have not changed yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. That's such a moving story, and I'm very glad you're here to share it with us. My question is about, sorry, is this okay? Okay. You have spoken to a lot of organizations and people now. I'm interested to know which have been the most receptive to your message. A lot of today you spoke about Vale's resistance, but who are the people that are very supportive of your message? You also mentioned that you'd like to see stronger action from the UN, for example, so I'm just interested to see the kind of organizations you've been engaging with. And then I guess as an extension of that, I want to know if you can just tell us a little bit more about what's next for you. You're here in Australia. Where do you see your future panning out?
In Brisbane.
So the first question is, who supported me, right? Or us? Yeah, in that sense. So, let's see. A lot of local people, as I said, local NGOs, organizations, and some from abroad as well. For example, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, they've been greatly supportive. Miser, which is a religious organization from Germany. In Europe, several NGOs, heard me and are supporting the actions that are happening. There's a main one that was with me in Paris. What is the acronym? I'm sorry, I won't remember now, but there has been a lot of support. Yeah, even like the Church of England, for example, they have been also great. So yeah, a lot of them. But unfortunately, of course, not Vale, for example, or companies in Brazil. Like when I first came here, I told Theo that I was surprised that it was a mining company involved, because in Brazil, like, they've been totally shut off and not wanting to listen to the communities or the people or make things right for the people. Yeah, and the second one about future. So I'm for some time now, like ever since I got involved in all of this, my life has changed drastically. I suddenly saw myself becoming an international activist and being involved with so many people from all over the world. And I started to see that a lot has to be done, that the communities have to be better represented, especially in a global sense, because most people from Brazil don't speak English, for example, so it's very hard for people from other countries to understand and to hear from us. Many people don't get that chance. So my background is I'm an English teacher, and after I lost my sister, when I learned all of this that I shared with you tonight, that she shouldn't have died, that her death could have been prevented, that's when I decided to do something about it and to start speaking, to raise awareness and to fight for justice, for non-repetition. And I decided, well, I started thinking about changing my career to work more into this and maybe to study something related to this. And since I got here and I met Professor Deanna, I'm actually planning to stay here in Australia and study and work maybe to help the companies that are interested in change, maybe consult or help, like anything. So let's see what's going to happen.
Thank you. Do you have a big voice or do you need a microphone?
I can talk about it.
Yeah, but maybe stand up so everyone can see. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And I was thinking about the transparency gap and how you could have had that engagement, meaningful engagement that you would have. And as a recipient of that event, like as a lesson learned right now, how would you want to take it with the education of what's happening in Brumadinho and as a part of that community, the transparency gap?
Like how to close?
Yeah,
that
like
gap?
the communication in that gap.
You mean
And
between?
maybe I'll, if I can just sprinkle a little bit more into your question,
Yep.
which is, I mean, you've been asked before about information being shared with local communities and local people, and we know, you know, from conversations with the industry that there is a hesitancy. Sometimes, you know, this is, we don't want people to panic. We don't want people to freak out. How do we have that, you know, that conversation? So I guess if you could take it as, how do we start that conversation? Will people panic? Maybe we shouldn't share that information. Could you talk to us a little bit more from a community perspective? Would you have panicked if you received information about what was around you, or tell us how you would have digested that and then what you think you would suggest to industry? Because, you know, the standard is requiring more information to communities, and that's a really, you know, that's a tough thing for the industry to be thinking through. So perhaps engage the question that way. Would that be okay?
That's it. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. Well, from my experience, people don't panic. They want to know, they want to be informed. I guess the best way to close this gap is to actually talk, you know, to people in a way that people can understand, in a way that's not arrogant or forcing people to do something. Yeah, I don't think it's rocket science.
Yes. Grant, hello.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, you ran out of my vision.
I'm sorry, just before you ask, just to add something to the previous question. So, my sister was working in Vale. She had been there for 10 years. And I'm not sure if she knew from the beginning about this dam, but of course, after Mariana, people became a little more concerned, and the dam was located just above the offices. So yeah, people were aware of the risk, maybe, of course, not that of how high level it was, because that wasn't shared with them. But for example, when there was this safety training that happened, and my sister talked to my mom about it, my mom asked her, Natalia, is there a chance of it bursting? And how risky is it? And she said, yeah, probably there is a risk of it bursting. And my mom asked her, aren't you afraid of dying? And she said that she wasn't afraid. So I think that's one proof that not everybody is going, to panic, but I think people need to process the information and know about it.
Thank you, Angelica, for this moving talk and sharing your story with us. But my question is, industrialization has been there, and there has been many other disasters in human history. Like I come from India. I know a couple of those. Bhopal gas tragedy, you might have heard of. There is a belt of coking coal in India which sits on a burning coal, burning face of coal. I've been part of that project to move those people, making them realize of, what sort of risk they are sitting at. So I just want to understand after this, how has the behavior of community changed towards the risk they are in, and how this industrial engagement is improving that risk awareness towards the community. Because that's the key thing. Because for developing economies, the industrialization has to happen, and that's the conversation, I think. Are there any efforts you and your group are working towards it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So I think if with a greater awareness about risks in your community, given what's happened, what's changed on the ground in terms of people's engagement with what's around them, the risks of tailings facilities. But there was another dimension in it as well, in terms of prior disasters, and what are we learning as well from what's happened before in other places? Are you connecting? Is the community connecting to what's happened elsewhere? Is that being brought into the mix? So I guess it's a curiosity around, with this information about the incident, what's happening, and how is that changing people's engagement with risk on the ground?
All right. So prior to the failures, there was a huge trust in Vale and in the companies. Because of how they portrayed their concern for safety. People used to believe that. The workers used to feel really safe in the mines and in the operations, because they thought that the company cared for their safety. So of course, after Brumadinho especially, and all of this knowledge that became available, that they knew the risks before and didn't take any measures, it's like a glass shattered. So nobody trusts Vale anymore, and many people are in fear of what could happen. But in terms of engagement, like, there isn't a lot of engagement between communities and Vale. So there isn't, for example, a hotline or someone from public relations that has access to people, or that people can have access to. It's like there isn't this bridge, I would say.
So another leading question to that: are you or the social groups you are engaging with, they are looking at the angle of making those community aware of the risk they are dealing with, they are sitting at? Because Vale will be gone, somebody else will come. Like somebody's EIS doesn't get passed in India, some other mining company So I'm just not naming the company here, but somebody will do the mining, right? And that doesn't impact the risk of, livelihood and consequences that can happen to environment, people, or the society.
So I guess it's a question about, is that information deficit being filled by anyone? So if Vale's not filling it, are other people stepping in to help communities understand, the context in which they're living, so that there is more information available? So I think it's a question to kind of understand, given the incident and given the lack of information, what's happening. Is anyone filling that gap? Is anyone helping, local communities to be more informed about what's in their community?
All right. After Brumadinho, Tufsud said, we can no longer attest the safety of that, and such that. And of course, the people who were around it, in that moment, they panicked because, boom, suddenly we know we can die at any second. Let me think. So, if other than that, there are more actions to communicate with people, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And of course, in our hometown, we want to advocate for life, safety, but there are so many battles that we can take. And for example, one of the main fights of Ava Brum is that all of the people are recovered. So there's constant struggle so that the firemen won't stop the operations as it happened before. They stopped for a while, and it's very important for us that all the families get closure. Of course, the reparations part, which, as I mentioned, has been done terribly. So, yeah, many struggles over there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
The reparations, the information deficit still kind of sits there, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I think we're coming to the end of questions. It's been a very long day for Angelica. So we will draw things to a close in a moment, unless there are any other questions that, if we come to the end, someone's like, oh no, I really want to ask one. So this is the opportunity. Yes, there's always one. So,
I'll ask one question. And
yep,
it might be for you, not just Angelica. But first, thank you, Angelica. That was very moving. But I guess the thing that I took home was, I guess, how disappointed you were in Vale. And you made a comment about them being quite a large percentage owned by the government. And is there a general, I perhaps naively thought if a government-owned company, they'd be closer to the people, but obviously is there, I guess, more on a global scheme, do you find that government-owned companies behave better or worse in the community?
I think that's a big question. But the role of the state is varied across many different companies, and when there is a state interest in big mines, there can be complicity in decisions that are not necessarily in the benefit of the people, but in the aim of profits, which was your point. So no, not necessarily. State-owned companies don't necessarily do better. Often they do worse. And it's a very complicated answer. But I think we have a last question from the back. And Angelica, and David as well. See, it always happens right at the end. So we'll take one, and then David, and then I'll give you the last word, Angelica. So we'll let you close out with the final word after these couple of questions. If you're okay to take a couple more.
Yes, that's
okay.
fine.
Thank you, Angelica. It was such a moving presentation, and I'm really glad that I came, and I think most of the room probably are as well, to be able to experience what you experienced and be able to hear you speak so eloquently. So thank you very much. You concentrated a lot on the errors of the company, Vale, and I think quite rightfully so. But and I understand that there are things that we could do better in tailings. Tailings dam fail 1,000 times more than water dams. It's wrong. But whenever I see mining, and I'm in the mining industry, I also reflect on consumerism and our society's consumption of the metals and the materials that we have to mine to be able to consume. And I just reflecting more recently on our drive for zero carbon and how much we're trying to consume our way out of the issue. I just wondered whether you, in this whole experience, I'll talk a bit louder, have gone down that avenue a little bit as well, and thought about how, as individuals, the message of reduce, reuse, recycle is kind of lost, and that I don't believe that there's any zero impact mining that can happen. I think we can reduce impact, but there'll always be an impact, and we'll always need mining if we're consuming at the rate we are. I don't know whether that's something
That
you
makes
might be able
sense,
to
yeah.
comment on.
But of course, it's impossible to have mining without impact, and it's impossible to have a modern society without mining. But yeah, over-consumerism is a problem, because the more we mine, the more waste we generate, the more tailings, the more risk. And yeah, it's a vicious cycle. Sorry, I got lost in what I was going to say. Can you repeat that, please, so I can remember my train of thought?
The microphone's totally out, but I think it was just a reflection on consumerism and consumption, and the proposition that
I remember.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it's impossible to not have impact, but there's a big difference between knowing something and deciding not to do anything about it, than just impact, or let's say just environmental impact. Of course, environmental impact is bad, but losing lives is worse. So, yeah.
So we're going to let David ask his question in the mic. I can't give you a mic, so you can just stand up and use your big voice.
I just wanted to say, firstly, what a pleasure it's been to spend most of the last week. Deanna and I have spent a lot of time with you over the last week. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you present so eloquently. It's just fantastic. Now, one of the key things, I was going to say something about Vale. One thing people might reflect on, that one of the differences with Vale is that they control about 90% of all mining in Brazil. That's unprecedented. There's no one company that does that in any other country, any other jurisdiction in the world. And I think that reflects a little bit in the way they are a little arrogant towards the people they interact with. That's one comment. But the other thing is, I want to highlight the fact that you are a fantastic communicator, and really a lot of our issues about this question are to do with communication, and the engineers among us need to learn how to communicate with the social scientists and vice versa, but I think the social scientists, by my perception, do a far better job than we do. So we need to learn how to communicate in a very effective, I don't think we can match you, but if we could go part way to matching you in terms of our communication style. Engineers are relatively poor at communicating. We need to communicate in a simple way. And it would be almost impossible, I think, for an engineer to explain to a community that, I've done a dam break analysis and it says that it's going to inundate your village. It's a credible failure mode, it may be very unlikely, but that's what we've done. We've calculated this, and sorry, you're all going to die. No, we're not going to say that, but how do you communicate as engineers something like that? It's a huge challenge. So we need to do some serious thinking, I think, among the engineering community. First of all, to reduce those risks, but also to start communicating it. Because one of the things you said is that you grew up in Brumadinho. You had no idea that there was a tailings dam that would risk people's lives just up the hill from you. It was only Samarco, Fundao was the thing that highlighted it, and then you had your own failure. So we've done a really poor job as engineers, I can speak that way because I am one, at communicating that risk level. And we should stop putting our head in the sand and pretending we don't need to communicate it. We do. We need to start learning how to communicate that. A fantastic talk, and I'm sure we'll see more of you.
Thank you.
Angelica the final word, but is there anything else that you would like to say to the audience?
I've covered it.
I think we've got it. So David, you've had the final word. And hand over to Simon to give thanks. Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you, Angelica. I think the thoughts and just how grateful we are that you've been able to come and present to us tonight. And I think I speak behalf of everyone in the room here in terms of the sorrow and sorry to hear and of your sister's loss. I think that's, we're all collectively very sorry to hear that, and as tailings professionals and mining companies, we're, I guess, to somewhat feel a tad guilty in terms of what we do as a profession, and we need to get better at what we do. As David just mentioned, the communication piece and the way we clearly articulate what we do as part of our business. Look up there and think of the words ALAP. What does it mean to you now? Think of PAR, PAR. What does it mean to you now? They're very important words we use on a daily basis. We generate FN curves in what we do at work. What does that mean? We talk about acceptable loss of life in the work that we do. What does that mean? So there's some very powerful things that we do as part of our profession that we need to think about, and think about clearly about what it actually means. That's what it means. So thank you again. It's been a very powerful evening, and I think everyone is going to take away something from this evening in terms of getting better at what we do and thinking more about what we do. And as a small token of appreciation, we've organised a little gift for you. So Kathy, if we've got this here. So on behalf of the Queensland Tailings Group and everyone who's attended, we'd like to present a small gift to you, Angelica. So thank you. Thanks again, and if anyone would like to have a chat to Angelica, I think we need to get out of here at about 10 to 8, but yeah, a little bit of time left. But again, to wind everything up, I'd like everyone to join me in another round of appreciation for Angelica's